Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Susie Harris. This is my podcast, Next 7. And the focus of this podcast is to be just kind of exposing people to the need for clean organic foods, clean water, and access to functional healthcare. So, I kind of have this feeling that if everyone had access to clean food, clean water, and functional healthcare, we would be leaving a planet behind ourselves that can help the next 7 generations thrive. And I'm super psyched today. I have an awesome practitioner here today, Dr. Tessier. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I know. She and I, we're pals, and so we really get down the rabbit hole with a lot of things. I'm going to have to try to keep us focused because we just, brains go off and get excited about stuff. But I'm going to talk about you for a second.
Sure.
So you got your bachelor's in science from Massachusetts College of Pharmacy in Boston. And then you earned your doctorate degree in naturopathic medicine at Tessier University in Kenmore, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Your current practice, Life After Mold, is in Waterbury, right?
Yes. Yep.
Waterbury, Vermont. And you offer a very patient-centered approach, helping people recover from mold-related illnesses. It's not the only thing you do, but that's a big part of that practice. I'm going to let you talk about some of this other stuff yourself, but what I really love about your work is you are holistic. You try to get underneath the causes and the underlying causes, educate your patients so they can become a part of their wellness and empower them so they can be succeeding in their healing process. Plus, I didn't know when I met you that you're kind of a big deal. You're like, you travel around the United States giving these lectures regarding mold illness. You're a consultant for a lot of, kind of state level agencies, if I'm not saying that wrong. And you're the current president of, what does ISEAI stand for?
Sure. So ICI is the International Society for Environmentally Acquired Illness. It's a mouthful.
Yeah. So, clearly something got your attention when you started training to be a doctor, to have you involved in all these ways.
Yeah.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, what is it that got you into this and that sort of thing?
Sure. How far back do we want to go?
Well, I'm always curious about what gets people inspired to pursue this, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot.
So I don't usually share this part of the story all too often. So when I was in my undergrad, I was doing a program in health psychology, and I had a little bit of a stutter step where I was like, health psychology, pre-med, what do I want to do? And must have been in my sophomore or junior year, I don't remember anymore, of college. There was a course that was herbs and nutraceuticals taught by this wonderful PharmD and herbalist named Lana Dvorkin. And I believe she's still at the school. And so she was this one guiding light in the context of all this, where it was, talking about double-blind placebo-controlled trials in a pharmacy school about all these herbs. And it was just like, stuff that was resonating and hitting really deep. And if I even go further back into childhood, I just remember having like the Better Homes and Gardens books of home remedies around the house. And I used to love sitting down and like looking through it, and always the concept of finding a new use for something that was like so common, or like, I don't know, there was just always something so magical about that. It was always just kind of there for me. So yeah. So seeing being in Lana's class, and then during that time I also traveled and did some volunteer work. It was like ecotourism, volunteer stuff. Like it's a hard subject to broach for sure. I know that it's difficult, but when you're younger, you don't really think too much about like neocolonialism and going into a space and I'm volunteering. Um, but from that perspective, I did go to Guatemala right around that same time, spent a few weeks down there volunteering. And I remember there was this herb garden, and one of the local native Cachicaltra, I might be mispronouncing that, I'm sorry, had an herbal garden, and that was one of the places that you could volunteer. And I just remember kind of broken between the native language of Guatemala and then Spanish, right? Having someone come and translate, and me watching it and hearing, that this little boy needed something for the tummy troubles and bad dreams. And the guy just went over to the garden, grabbed what he needed, handed it off to the family, and they were on their way. So I came home with a bit of that in my heart too. And, if we're going way back to even the field that I wanted, that's probably where it stemmed from. The mold just kind of came along with the process as I went forward. But yeah, it's always been there in my mind of just turning back to nature to heal things, fix things. I've always had that connection. I was always the little kid who spoke to plants when I was a little one.
I mean, yes. And then watching like a medicine person just go pick the right herbs to help. I mean, I think most people know, but I'm not sure they know that most pharmaceuticals are patented versions of knockoffs of the components in herbs and nutrients and that sort of thing, but you can't patent that. So
Right.
Anyway, I don't want to be negative about that.
Right. And I mean, you're right. And when they do that pharmacy component, you're stripping down the isolates down to the one single constituent. You're not getting any of the synergistic components that might minimize side effects. So yeah, it's amazing. And that's a whole big political dialogue too of, what's happening with our loss of access to a lot of compounded medications right now. We're seeing.
What's happening there? You're not getting as easy of access to compounding
pharmacies?
pharmacies?
So for a while, the FDA has been working through a lot of injectable and IVs and things that they're just wanting to be more cautious about, understandably so. And one of the things that got put on the chopping block was in IV curcumin. And that kind of got pulled out of the hands of folks. No more, can't have it. And then probably about a month or two later, it was a patented drug. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Ay, ay, ay. Well, and I like what you're talking about with sounds like you're talking whole plant, whole nutrient in a lot of the approaches that you take, so that you're getting that full spectrum that's present in the wholeness, as opposed to an isolate, which, like you said, kind of leaves out nature's balance of how to let your body have it without causing any issues.
Yeah, and I think that there's definitely a rhyme and place for the isolated like nutrition, where it's rather than a shotgun approach, you're looking for a vitamin B2 because you need riboflavin for whatever pathway, or like, sure, absolutely, there's that. But yeah, the plant medicine, I mean, that's the biggest, most powerful part about it, is it's so synergistic with all its parts.
I think that's what I love about the work that you do, is it is both and, it's not exclusive. You're like listening to all sides, and your training touches on so many different perspectives that you really can have the best of not just both, because there's more than two worlds, all the different components that let us be more, I think, holistic, I guess is such an overused word, but functional for sure.
Right.
I'm curious. So here's you come out, you've got this plethora of knowledge and passion. You're coming out to do some cool functional stuff. And how did you get pulled into the mold thing? How'd that happen?
The mold thing.
The mold thing.
The mold
a lot.
thing. Yep. So I ended up in Waterbury, Vermont, which I had known in advance there was a flood that happened there. And I mean, it's in the name, if we actually take a beat.
Very. Okay.
Buried by water.
You're talking about after Hurricane Irene?
Hurricane Irene, yeah. And so I landed here in 2013, and I hung my little shingle as independent primary care and had people coming in, and it was just like these resistant cases of like fatigue, brain fog. And of course it was like, well, we'll check anemia, we'll check your B12, we'll check your folate, your vitamin D, you know, all the usual stuff. And nothing was working, nothing was getting traction. So then with one case in particular, I had someone mention that they had an office in the basement, and they had mentioned the flood, and you know, it just came up naturally, you know, on my dialogue at that time. It was like, toxic mold maybe, but you know, fungal allergy for sure, fungal infection, the same thing as, you know, traditional allopathic medicine. And so it wasn't until we dug a little bit deeper and realized that there was a connection there. And thankfully, that first time, I learned the value of proper remediation, because what started off that conversation was, there's a flood and my office is in the basement, but it's remediated and it's fine. So there was a blessing in having heard that and experienced that, realizing that's not fine. First time is not always the charm of remediation. But thankfully, we worked through it, and a lot of the difficulties that they were experiencing improved. And, you know, the big core of it was really the brain fog and fatigue. So, yeah.
Working the mold out of their system in a way that made sense to you got them to come out of those issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's every year there's a new level. There's a, you know, you think I won't say you think you've mastered it, because I've learned that lesson very, very well. I think we all have. You have the opportunity to keep learning. And it's not until you hit the next challenge that you get to expand into the next amount of learning. And so my process was really interesting, because it started with a toxic component and then moved into this world of CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and then moved back into the toxic component as what really underscores my approach with people. So after I started working with more and more people with mold, I of course then had my own exposure with mold in, you know, in our home. And just like everyone else, it was, could it be mold? I don't know. Is it mold? You know, you can't see the forest through the trees
A
when
lot
you're
of times
in
you
it.
get the, I don't smell mold, or no, my house was built and, you know, it's not an old house.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And that's, you know, I mean, I've learned so much about building mechanics in my time, and where a lot of common construction errors occur. And I'm not an IEP, you know, I know how to swing a hammer, I know how to do some things, but it's been amazing to learn from my clients now, all the watch spots and all the problems. And, you know, if someone says something like, oh, I have a finished basement, or, you know, like we have in-wall issues, my first thought is, okay, well, is the ridge vent on the roof open, or did the roofers not actually vent it? You know, stuff that took me even years to figure out in our own home. And now it's something that I get to apply and help people out with. So, yeah.
So making sure there's good airflow, ventilation, and that sort of thing. I'm curious, when you said remediation, can you tell people what that means?
Yeah, and here's the hard part, is it varies from state to state. So remediation is the act of going into a space and removing the mold, removing the damage caused by the mold. But depending on the state you're in, the repair of the water intrusion is either there or not. So remediation, let's say I had mold in my wall from poor ventilation in my roof. The remediation is going in, tearing up the drywall, removing all of the moldy stuff, maybe putting a hydrogen peroxide, sanding it down, sealing it. That's remediation. Now going and figuring out why the heck it was leaking and there was water damage in the first place, and then building it back out so it's functional again. Those are things that are completely separate, but I believe in the state of New York, those all tend to be classified in remediation. Vermont, nope, just the tear up.
Okay, so just tear it out, but don't go look for how it got there.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I know I have to, this is a short little story that I found. You must hear this all the time, but I was like, what? It's one of my patients. We were picking up through the muscle testing stuff I do that mold was there, and they live in a place where they don't, it's a condo association, and the basement, clearly someone came and was like, oh yeah, there's mold here. But the association said, well, it's in the basement, it's not up where you are. So, assuming that the air doesn't circulate through the house, it is a big deal. It's a big deal to have to confront this issue. So most people really want to stick their head in the sand about it.
Right, right. And I mean that the air does rise. It's the chimney effect. It rises from the basement. You are not going to get air coming from a basement and going up. And that doesn't even bring into the dialogue of like wind hitting at the northeast corner of your house is going to change the whole entire air stacking throughout the building, and like, which way the air gets pulled, and like vacuums and pulls, like there's so much to building mechanics that it's good to realize how much is there, because then you start to realize that almost everything is a possibility. I've seen kitchen fans that were like, oh, it's the highest kitchen fan on the market. It's gonna, keep our kitchen from getting steamy. And it was pulling damp air down through their chimney. It was so strong, and and causing like water damage on the floor near a chimney.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's insane. So yeah, I've learned every day new ways in which the chaos of a home can, cause issues. So
Right.
yeah.
And so I don't know if you want to get into this piece, but when someone comes to you for care and you realize, oh, this seems like a mold issue, how do you verify that?
Yeah, so here's the great part about my practice is life after mold. Mold is in the name. So it's not me having to convince someone that I think mold is an issue. And I have been in that position before. In my I'm mold sensitive. I'll say it right off the bat. In my primary care practice, there was one instance where it was right when I was getting started. And I remember leaning in to listen to someone's lungs, and my eyes started burning and my throat started itching and post-nasal drip, and I get brain fogged and heady. And I asked them if, out of curiosity, could there be any mold in the home? And it was like, no, there's no, like, it's a 4-letter word. It's literally a
Makes you
4-letter
seem
word.
like you're not clean or
You're
something.
not clean, you don't keep up, and it happens to anyone. So that's BS. But if people aren't ready to hear it and see it, then it's going to damage rapport. So that was actually why I included it in the name of my practice, so that when people were coming to me, they had already thought like, could it be mold? Let me do some Googling and search and see. And oh, lo and behold, this pops up. So the dialogue of checking in with people doesn't really happen, because I mean, it does, but they already suspect it. There's not a convincing component. So I take a really good intake of the person. We do dialogue about the home, any types of signs of water damage, any history of water damage, the list goes on and on. I encourage people to have their home tested and assessed appropriately. And then once we get that variable kind of taken into consideration and we identify it and we understand what it is, that's when we start thinking about what's happening with the body. Because if you're thinking that the mold's in the environment, well, I have some news for you. We can also have mold exposure through our food, and we can also have mold exposure either through the biofilms in our body, or we can even have the toxins being stored away in our sub-Q fat, So when we kind of control for the home, then we get to kind of say, okay, that variable is, I won't say an impossibility, but a weak likelihood. Let's go through all the other places that we could have some exposure here. So when I work with people, doing the personal body assessment is something I really ask people to be ready to do. So doing the home stuff even before they see me, I find to be the most helpful.
Now, do you have a certain group that you like for assessing if someone has mold?
I do. They're listed on my website. They're a two-person team, and so they're awfully backed up, and they travel all around New England, more or less, to do the assessment. Rich Finnegan is the person that I use to do the assessment. And one of the main reasons is because I have good rapport with them. So, if I say, I have this concern about this, or they listen and they're willing to, look deeper, and they've seen enough of my clients where they know that mold growth in a wall can be something that can upset someone, and just because you don't see it visually doesn't mean you shouldn't check for it. So they've really cut their teeth on just how sensitive people can be, and that's why I continue to work with them.
And then they would, let's say they came and assessed someone's house and they saw that there was an issue. Do they then connect them with people who do the remediation?
Yeah, so we always try to keep remediation companies and assessors separate, just because of the potential conflict of interest there. So we like using the person who tests as the third party to do kind of like the pre-testing, and then they come in and they do the post-remediation testing to make sure that the work really, did what it needed to. So we keep those companies separate, and there are a few different remediation companies all around New England. There are some difficult experiences that I've seen people encounter with certain remediation companies, and obviously I won't list them, but I do direct people down certain pathways when it comes to certain companies. And it's all also dependent on, is it something do you need small particle remediation? Is it just the air that needs cleaning? Do you actually need to tear down an entire wall down to studs? Or is it, figuring out how to keep the concrete dry in your basement, so and also price range too, and if the person's chemically sensitive. And so there's a whole mess of things that go into how we kind of drive different directions to different remediation companies.
So, and that brings up a thought,
Yeah.
chemically sensitive, you said, because I
Yes.
know in part of your work, the environmentally acquired illnesses, so many chronic illnesses, chronic fatigue, headaches, joint pain, poor digestion, memory issues, all that skin stuff, allergies, asthma, we could keep going.
Yeah.
It's not just always about mold. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what you've seen in your practice when you dig into a case?
So what I'll first say is that the beautiful part about addressing mold is that usually if you're addressing your environment for a mold issue, you're going to level up the holding space. If you're going in and you're having to remediate something and pull out a wall and you're chemically sensitive, chances are you're going to opt for the low VOC paint and the low VOC flooring, or you're going to do air scrubbing for 3 weeks straight and clean up any of the other persistent crud that's in there. So very rarely do I see a worsening of exposure after remediation. So there's a bit of a level up that comes with it. So can you remind me? I want to make sure I hit on what you asked.
Yeah, I mean, so mold is a thing, but also, glyphosate, heavy
Right.
metals.
Right. Thank you. And so the environment gets addressed in a home, which is great. But then we have to think about the person. And are you familiar with Dr. William Ray?
I'm not.
Okay, so Dr. Ray was one of the founding members of AAEM, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine.
Uh-huh.
And he was based out of Texas. And one of the most common metaphors that you see being used now is this concept of your toxin bucket. And it's the idea of how many toxins your body is able to tolerate until it starts to overflow. And the idea of the overflowing is the expression of illness, and kind of the drain of the bucket is the liver, the kidneys, the sweating, the breathing, all these different things. So when I think of multiple chemical sensitivity, it's not so much that all these toxins are in and around the person, it's that their bucket has been so filled up that maybe the top 2 inches is all mycotoxin. And so there's no more room for that whiff of gasoline as you're pumping the gas. There's no more room when you're walking down the laundry detergent out, like your body is maxed out. So what I usually find is when people are in their biggest flare, they're usually super sensitive to scents, smells, chemicals. And of course that interfaces with like mast cell activation syndrome and all these different things. But yeah, I mean, once you clear up the person's mycotoxin load, you're also going to take that stress off that bucket. But the work that you're doing with the mycotoxin load isn't unlike the work that you would do for any other toxic burden. So, you know, again, it's like cleaning up the house. You're cleaning up the whole dang house. Cleaning up the body, you're cleaning up the whole dang body. So yeah, it usually comes out in the wash.
So opening up detox pathways, handling nutritional imbalances and all the lifestyle stuff. You know, a lot of the chronic inflammatory health issues coming from environmental toxins besides mold, you're saying address when you're going for mold, you're going to be, you can't not be moving those other things out as well.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
makes total sense. So is there an event coming that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. So the international nonprofit that I'm president of, ICI, so ISEAI, we are an educational professional group that teaches physicians how to do what I do, how to do what you do, how to, you know, teach what Jill Carnahan does. Like, you know, we're really focused on how the environment interfaces with complex chronic illness. And like you said, you know, the skin, the allergies, the gut stuff, it's like even atherosclerosis, even like heart inflammation, like the idea is any of the inflammatory issues that we have going on in the body has to have been triggered by something around us, you know?
Yeah.
So our goal is to work through that and try to help people figure that out. So we really started as a call and response to the ways in which other mold protocols weren't really working, weren't working for everybody. But as we moved forward in this realm, it's like, okay, well, you know, if we're going to talk about this, we got to talk about heavy metals. If we're going to talk about this, we got to talk about PFAs. If we're going to talk about this, we got to talk about cervical cranial instability. We have to talk about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. We have to talk about mast cell activation syndrome. So where typical environmental medicine has really seemed to be more allergen focused, we're really like, it all counts. Toxic spike proteins, you know, endotoxins, like it all counts. So we try to teach everything about the environment or everything about chronic illness in the context of the environment. And so we've been around since 2017. And of course, we all had the slowdown with the pandemic. And we had a conference in 2019, 2020, and now finally we're getting to have another conference. And this next one is actually going to be broken into 2 parts. And we're super stoked about this. So the first part is going to be a lot of the foundational stuff, complex viral stuff, complex occult infections, mold, you know, heavy metals, PFAs, all that kind of stuff. So it'll be the core foundational stuff. And that's going to be, I believe, May 19th through the 22nd. And then we're going to have a secondary one in the fall, which is going to be more of the advanced topics for people. And we're going to be speaking a good amount about COVID in that one. So,
Okay, is this for physicians and practitioners or public as well?
yeah, so we have decided that we are opening up to the public. There'll be a slightly different interface for the public, just because, you know, we're teaching at a professional level and we have to be careful about medical advice. I'm sure everyone understands that. But yeah, it will be open to the public. It's going to be virtual too, so totally accessible for everyone.
So if you know, any of the people that come through my practice wanted to entertain it, what would they gain from both parts of it? What would they
Sure.
pick up that would be
Yeah.
useful to them?
Um, you know, I think from a patient perspective, and I don't like using layperson perspective because you know a lot about existing in your own body. You know, I think the first thing would be validation, without a doubt. And then moving on from there, community, obviously. And then a lot of the other information might be a little sciencey, heavy-handed. However, it does open up the ability for some understanding and allows you to contextualize yourself within your medical team. So let's say you go in and you learn about mast cell activation syndrome, and you know, have some ideas on how to identify it. You also have resources. So you could have learned from Lauren Safran, and you go to your PCP and you say, hey, here's this information from Lauren Safran. Here's this book. Would you mind helping me with it? So, you know, we have to be cautious about self-treatment and these kinds of things. But it most definitely will give people a context for how to move through these issues.
Awesome. And including in the second one, you're going to be talking about what you and these other doctors have seen coming through the pandemic and dealing with COVID itself, but also, you know, any sort of fallout from treatments and things like that.
Yeah, that most definitely will be coming up in the fall. This time around, I believe we're getting Pierre Corey for the spring, which will be exciting. And then in the fall, we're still working on a couple of names. However, we have a few of our board members who are doing presentations on, you know, the chronic treatment. We're also having some people lecture on some of the treatment health fallouts for the pandemic. So it's going to be a thing, and we're really, really excited about it.
We're both being very careful, but I am just going to say, because I'm trying to be more vocal for my patients who did go through vaccine injury. Not everybody had that problem, but some people did, and those guys need help.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and it was such an interesting thing to see, because what I do feel comfortable in saying is that I didn't see vaccine injury for everyone. There was maybe a couple of people I did. And so I was very lucky from that perspective. And there were some even odder instances where people who had some of the worst cases of complex chronic illness that I've seen, you know, young folks, underwent the vaccine shortly after having come down with COVID. And I would have not encouraged that. Even the CDC, whatever, doesn't encourage that, but it cleared up the lingering symptoms. And it was at that moment where it was just like, okay, well, that's unexpected. And I think that's really the take home to this, is that there's so much unexpected about it.
So much more to learn. I actually saw that too, which
Did you?
I'm not a big fan of going that route.
Right.
However, everybody's body's different, and I respect everyone's idea to choose what they want to do once they get all the data so they can make an informed decision. But some of my chronic folks that deal with Lyme and things like that, something about the shot for those guys, I made up in my mind that it created such a response in the body that it woke up some of the body's natural abilities to go manage uncontrolled inflammation.
Yeah. It was almost like a prolotherapy or something, right? Injected
Right,
like
almost yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
all right.
I think while I had the opportunity to kind of share some of this stuff, you know, I think everyone has been very cautious in moving through this. We've seen a lot of physicians who have said some pretty even keel things come under fire. but I can speak about my own personal health experience and my health journey. And I'm seen for some GI issues, some autoimmune GI issues. And I went to my particular specialist at a particular well-known hospital the next state over from us, starts with a D. And I was speaking to the provider about, what my options were about vaccination. And we were talking about the different forms, the Johnson and Johnson versus the Pfizer, Moderna, and even the Novavax, which I had my eyes on for a while. It's kind of like, okay, it's old school tech, might come stateside. And I said, have you seen any flares of my XYZ condition when people were vaccinated? And they said, no, not too many. And I said, oh, interesting. Well, would you mind sharing what happened? And they had said that they see liver enzymes pop up in people with my issue within the 6 weeks following vaccination. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So what do you guys do in that particular case? And no word of a lie, the answer was, oh, we just don't measure LFTs during that 6-week period. And that wasn't enough for me. I was frankly surprised that this particular physician didn't have a concept of the Novavax option and the fact that it was overseas and all the, it's just, there's so many moving pieces. And if there's one thing I could drive home to people, it's okay to move in a measured fashion and collect more data. It doesn't have to be a no now, doesn't have to be a no forever. It doesn't have to be a yes now. It doesn't have to be a yes forever. It's, I need more information. And I think that's okay. Whether people are pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, I'm a big believer in medical freedoms, and so that's where I am with all of it. It's, yeah.
Definitely, with all the fear around it, and so, in the very beginning, it was so scary that we've just got a lot of fear packed on there. I'm hoping that we're seeing that dissolve a bit and dissolving some of that. I mean, I truly, I usually bring this up that I have folks in my office whose families choose not to use that route because they've had injury in their history. One, family, some people have lost a child or whatever. So genetically, they know that's not a great idea for their family, and they go another route, and they've worked very hard on that other route. So to be told no longer they can have that route,
Right.
and they have to do something that's extremely dangerous for their family, they're not going to do that.
Right.
But again, there is no one answer here. How could something so big and complex have one answer? It's just not possible. But I think we've done a fairly good job. Well, I don't know. I just want to say I love people, and I really feel like we are I'm watching some dissolve of the passionate fear. And so we're coming together and being more graceful and compassionate and listening to each other, which is really where it's at. We have to just take care of each other and allow space,
Right. And, nothing is going to be well tolerated if fear is in the mix. It's the activation of the fight or flight, everything's a threat. And so, yeah, I'm really hoping, I'm holding out for humanity. And this goes into our other conversations that we have. I am holding out hope for
Yes.
humanity that we figure this all out.
Humanity. I think so too. I think we're capable. I mean, this might sound airy-fairy, but a lot of what we're going through really has pushed us to have to look in on ourselves, and do some growing.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a couple fun questions for you. Do you feel like you said enough though about this event? I'll put a link in the notes.
How
Okay.
do we get on that topic? Right.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So we'll
to
have
have
some
people-
more information about it for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll plug a link. There'll be a link attached to this podcast episode, so people can click that link and go learn more about it. I'm curious because I admire you. You are one of the people that I watch because you're just really talented and you're super I don't know, you're just awake. I love listening to you talk about things. I wonder who who do you admire?
Hmm. Hmm.
Who leads your heart around these days? I'm sure it moves around, but
um, I think that there's two people who have made a really big lasting impact on me. And the first one was my high school AP chemistry teacher, my basic chemistry, AP chemistry teacher. And he would set up his tests so everyone would fail. Everyone. So you had the type A, the top of the top in their class going in there and having their butts served to them in these tests. And his thing would be failure builds character. Failure builds character.
wow.
It would boil your blood. It would boil my blood. And it was probably one of the best learning experiences that I ever had that wasn't, classroom oriented. And then I would have to say the other person right now in this moment is Paul Anderson. He is he's a naturopathic physician. He was one of my teachers when I went through best year. And then when he kind of went out on his own and started doing CEU training and all this kind of stuff for physicians, just kind of like, that's my mentor. That's that's my person. And Paul's wonderful. And you hear it and you see it and you feel it, like when he's talking about kids, he calls them like the little people, and he gives everyone the room to be who they are. He doesn't minimize people. He's always bringing some type of like humor or like jovial sarcasm into his teaching. There's swearing, which I love swearing.
You appreciate.
Right? I appreciate it. But he's so backed by research and what he does in his clinical experience. And then, so there's like the warm character component. And, but then he goes and he gives testimony for the FDA. He goes and gives testimony when some pharmacy board is trying to pull something out of access to patients. Like, he's just so committed. I don't think he sleeps. I'm pretty sure he doesn't sleep. And he'd laugh at that if he heard that. But, and he's just one of those people where you see him in circles on Facebook groups with access. Other physicians have access and they'll shoot him a message and they'll be like, hey, do you have any insight on this? And it's like without missing a beat. It's like, oh, well, like riboflavin and D and like just is on it and always willing to help and support. And, I've had a lot of, I'm not everyone's cup of tea. And I've also had a lot of experiences with other teachers and other physicians where it's been made known that like I'm not their cup of tea or vice versa. And I've just never seen Paul do that to someone who's wanted to learn. And it's pulling on my heartstrings now. I've been talking about it. So I think he's wonderful. And I tell him all the time, it's one of those things like you need to tell the people you care about how much you appreciate them while you can.
Yes.
Don't regret it. Yeah.
Not excuse me, not your cup of tea. Not I know what you're talking about because you're so smart and you're going to drop some good questions in there. Not everybody loves that.
I remember, Susie, if you don't mind, when I was going through school, I pissed off this one particular teacher because we were talking about what it was to be in service to someone. And I said, what about the existential question of like, what if there's something to be said about someone moving through an illness because it's something that they need to learn through this path in life? Like, what if it's like a karmic thing? And this was someone who like does breathing and, someone who's really, into the whole spiritual tradition. And it was just like, what kind of question is that? I was like, okay, my questions aren't allowed here, and that was never anything that I had with Paul, and I really appreciate him.
Sounds delightful. Well, so one more heart question, because I love when people come to hear practitioners, doctors, physicians come through and talk the business end and the medical end, just to get a piece of your heart. And this is a question lots of people ask, but so where you're standing now, you as yourself at this age and all the things you've achieved and done, if you could speak to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell her?
Oh, oof. Uh, hmm, hmm. 20.
Or somewhere in that age
No,
range.
I'm gonna hold you to 20 because
Yeah.
I don't want to address me from 21 to 28. So there's that. 20, like, you're doing good. Keep going. Don't give a flying toot about other people's perceptions. It's not worth it. I mean, yeah, that's really what it comes down to.
I
And
love that.
also, you got a long way ahead of you. So move in a measured and metered fashion, for sure.
Pace yourself kind of thing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm just really glad that we both could find the time to sit together because we're usually both running around like crazy. Is there anything else you want to share with people before we sign off?
Yeah. I really would love if more people got the message that it's okay if you're the only one clear about what you need in your health. I see that all too often with mold and mold exposure. It's very rarely do people live in a vacuum where I live in an apartment by myself and I can cut and run, leave the moldy space and do what I need to. People always have relationships, people they interact with. Some are really healthy relationships, some are not. And one of the hardest things that I see people navigate is really coming into the fact of like, I need help. This is mine. This is me. This is not your experience. You can either help me, you can either, what is it, poop or get off the pot, so to speak. And I really just want to encourage more people to really stand in the power of, if you need something, ask for it. And if people aren't there to help you and be supportive of you, what are they there for? So
Keep reaching. Mm-hmm.
right.
How can people find you?
Sure. So people can find me at my practice, Life After Mold. I have a website, lifeaftermold.com, and I'm working all over social media. I actually have a TikTok, which I'm hoping on growing. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I have a couple of videos on YouTube about multiple chemical sensitivity, brain inflammation, longer form stuff. And I have a couple of posts on Pinterest. So that's how people can follow me. If they head over to my website, they can get a hold of a free ebooklet that I have when you sign up for my newsletter. And it kind of gives you all the places to watch around a home. So if you're thinking that there might be mold exposure, there might be an issue. It's like, do you have condensation on your pipes? Do you have proper French drains? Or so it just kind of opens up people's perspective of what could be an issue. Yeah.
So if people go to your website, there's an offer pops up for a free ebook that has that information. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and they can also find it on another tab if they happen to close up the pop-up like I always do. So.
Okay. Hey, I was trying to read that.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'll definitely put links in this episode that are to your website and that sort of thing. And if you have any specific videos you want me to plug in there, I can put those there too. So maybe send those over.
Okay, right on.
Thank you so much. You're
Thank
such
you
an
so
amazing
much.
person. A mom, a partner, a doctor, a friend. I just really admire you. So thank you for taking the time to be with me today.
Oh, well, I appreciate it, Susie, and it's been so nice developing our friendship and our camaraderie. It's a wonderful thing to have. Thank
Absolutely. Well, okay. So again, thank you everyone for hanging out with us today. This is the podcast Next 7. The focus is to be increasing awareness for people to be aware. That's aware. So you're aware that having access to clean organic food, clean water, and functional healthcare, which means a lot of things. Many different amazing people here offering that sort of care. So, leaving behind us a planet that helps our next 7 generations thrive. Thanks again, and we'll be talking with you soon.